Okay, this morning, J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, was asked about Israeli criticism of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding. And his response, Chamam, his actual response to a question about America's closest Middle Eastern ally was this: Israel needs to wake up and smell the reality of the situation that country is in. Let that sit for a moment. Not diplomatic language, not careful hedging, not "we understand Israel's concerns and we remain committed to the relationship." Wake up and smell reality. That is the language a patron uses when he has decided he no longer needs the client. And I want to spend the next 20 minutes showing you exactly why those 6 words, wake up and smell reality, are the most structurally significant thing any American official has said about Israel in decades. Not because of what they reveal about Vance personally, but because of what they reveal about the architecture of a relationship that has defined American foreign policy since 1948. And here's the thing nobody in mainstream media is connecting properly right now. This fracture didn't happen because of a policy disagreement. It didn't happen because Netanyahu was difficult, or because Trump's team miscalculated, or because the negotiations in Islamabad moved too fast. It happened because of a logic, a structural logic. A logic that was built into this war from the beginning. And once you see that logic clearly, once you understand the mechanism, you will never read the US-Israel relationship the same way again. Let's get into it. All right, to understand what is actually breaking here, you need to understand a concept I want to call the patron-client inversion. Most people think of alliances as partnerships, 2 countries with shared interests working together toward a common goal. And on the surface, the US-Israel relationship has always been described that way: shared values, shared security interests, an unbreakable bond. But underneath that language, there is a structural reality that is very different. The United States is a superpower with global interests. Israel is a regional power with regional interests. And for most of the past 70 years, those interests overlapped enough that the structural asymmetry didn't matter. America provided weapons, diplomatic cover, financial support, and a security guarantee. Israel provided intelligence, operational capacity, and a foothold in the most strategically important region on the planet. The relationship worked because both sides were getting something they needed. Here is what changed. When the United States decided, and I want to be very clear, America decided, not Israel. When America decided that the cost of continuing this war exceeded the benefit, it needed an exit. And to get that exit, it needed to give Iran something real. What Iran wanted, what Iran had been fighting for, was legitimacy. The recognition that it is a permanent and irreducible feature of the Middle Eastern landscape, a power that cannot be destroyed, only managed. The Islamabad MOU gave Iran that legitimacy. Not explicitly, not in those words, but structurally, that is exactly what it did. And here is the problem. Israel's entire strategic architecture for the past 40 years has been built on the opposite premise. The premise that Iran can be isolated, degraded, and eventually broken. That the Islamic Republic is an aberration, a temporary disruption to the natural order, and that if enough pressure is applied for long enough, it will collapse. I have talked about this before. Some people call it the Greater Israel Project. I call it Pax Judaica. The idea is this. You systematically dismantle every regional power capable of challenging Israeli dominance. Iraq, done. Libya, done. Syria, done. Iran was supposed to be the final piece, the last serious challenger. And when Iran fell, Israel would become the undisputed center of a new Middle Eastern order, underwritten by American military power and Israeli operational capability. That project required one thing above everything else. It required the United States to be all the way in, not diplomatically ambiguous, not calculating its own exit costs, all the way in, until Iran was finished. America just told Israel it is not all the way in, and that is the patron-client inversion. The client thought it was in a partnership. The patron just reminded it of the actual hierarchy. Now, I want to give you the numbers here because the numbers are genuinely extraordinary. A recent poll conducted inside Israel found that 92.1% of Israelis, Jewish and Arab Israelis combined, believe Iran was the primary beneficiary of the Islamabad MOU. 92%. That is not a political opinion in Israel. That is a national consensus. 86% of Israelis have a negative view of the agreement itself. These are the people whose country fought alongside American B-2 bombers for months. The people Pete Hegseth called a steadfast partner with unmatched skill in battle. And 86% of them think the deal that ended the war their American partner built around them is a disaster. Nearly half of Israeli respondents said Israel should continue attacking Lebanon regardless of American objections. And here's the part that should tell you everything about where this relationship actually stands right now. Netanyahu and Defense Minister Katz publicly declared, not privately, publicly, even if America asks us to withdraw from Lebanon, we will not. The Prime Minister of Israel just openly defied the country that provides his military's weapons and his government's diplomatic cover. On the record, in public. We have not seen this in the modern history of this alliance. So how did we get here? What is the mechanism? I want to walk you through 3 specific decisions that were made during the Islamabad negotiations. Decisions that, taken together, make the current fracture structurally inevitable. Decision number 1. Israel had no seat at the table. When the United States sat down with Iran in Islamabad, the parties present were the United States, Iran, Qatar, Pakistan. Those are the countries that shaped the final text. Those are the voices that determined which concessions were made and which were not. Israel, the country that flew its aircraft alongside American bombers for months. The country that absorbed the political and diplomatic cost of being seen as the instigator of this conflict. The country whose intelligence infrastructure was essential to targeting Iranian military assets was not in the room. Not one representative. Not one. And to make it worse, Qatar, which Israel views as a sympathizer of Hamas, was a key mediator. Pakistan, which has no diplomatic relations with Israel, was the host country. These are the parties that wrote the ceasefire Israel is now expected to honor. Israel's ambassador to Washington said it directly. He said he needed clarity about American policy. He said the premise of Israeli-Lebanese talks in Washington was that Iran would have no role. But the MOU includes a deconfliction mechanism that explicitly involves Iran. And then he said, Iran's role is not to restrain Hezbollah. Iran's role is to get out of Lebanon. That is diplomatic language for, I do not recognize the deal you just made. Decision number 2, the Lebanon Clause. Article 1 of the Islamabad MOU states a permanent and immediate cessation of military activities on all fronts, including Lebanon. Israel did not sign this agreement, but America did. And America signed it knowing that Israel had no intention of stopping operations in Lebanon. Netanyahu had already told Trump directly, Israel will retain freedom of operational action in all arenas. The morning after the MOU was signed, Israeli airstrikes killed at least 47 people in Lebanon. So Iran immediately asked the entirely logical question, if the United States cannot stop its closest ally from violating Article 1 within the first 72 hours of signature, what exactly is America's commitment worth? That question, not Iran's nuclear program, not Hormuz, not the asset freeze, that question is what canceled the Switzerland technical talks. Iran did not cancel those talks because it was being difficult. Iran canceled those talks because it was running a power test, testing whether America can actually deliver what it promises. And the answer, so far, is no. Decision number 3, J.D. Vance. When Israeli officials publicly criticized the MOU, when they raised legitimate concerns about being excluded from the negotiations that determined the outcome of a war they helped fight, the Vice President of the United States told them to wake up and smell reality. Not, we hear your concerns. Not, the alliance remains unbreakable. Not, we will work together to address these issues. Wake up and smell reality. Now, I want to do something I always do. I want to give you the strongest possible argument on the other side. Because I never want you to simply accept what I'm telling you without stress testing it. The strongest argument for why this is not a structural fracture, why this is a manageable disagreement between close allies, goes like this. The U.S.-Israel alliance has survived significant tensions before. Carter pushed hard on settlements. Reagan sold weapons to Saudi Arabia over Israeli objections. Bush Sr. withheld loan guarantees. Obama had an openly adversarial relationship with Netanyahu. And through all of it, the security relationship remained intact. The weapons kept flowing, the diplomatic cover at the UN continued. The fundamental commitment never wavered. From this view, what we are seeing right now is a transactional disagreement over the terms of a ceasefire, not a rupture in the underlying relationship. America needs a deal to manage domestic political pressure. Israel needs operational freedom to manage its security situation. These interests are in tension right now, but tension is not fracture. That is a genuinely reasonable argument. It has historical precedent. But here is what that argument cannot explain. It cannot explain why Israel was excluded from the negotiations entirely. Previous disagreements between the US and Israel played out within a shared framework. America and Israel argued about tactics while agreeing on strategic direction. What happened in Islamabad is different. The strategic direction itself, the question of whether Iran gets legitimacy, whether Hezbollah survives, whether the axis of resistance remains intact, was decided without Israel present. It cannot explain the public nature of the defiance. Netanyahu is not privately pushing back through diplomatic channels. He is publicly declaring that Israel will ignore direct American requests. That is not how junior partners in functional alliances behave. And it cannot explain the 92%. When 92% of a country's population, including its Arab minority, agrees that the deal its patron just signed represents a victory for its existential enemy, that is not a manageable disagreement. That is a population that has lost confidence in the patron's judgment. And a patron that has lost a client's confidence has lost its ability to coordinate that client's behavior. America can no longer assume that Israel will act within the parameters of American diplomatic strategy. That assumption broke in Islamabad. Now I want to add a layer to this analysis. Because the Israel-America fracture does not exist in isolation, it exists inside a larger structural shift that I think most analysts are significantly underweighting. Here is what is happening simultaneously. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, all welcomed the Islamabad MOU. These are the countries that Israel spent 4 decades trying to pull into an anti-Iran coalition. These are the countries whose alignment was supposed to be the regional foundation of Pax Judaica. On June 25th, the same day that Italy publicly contradicted NATO's Secretary General about the Iran strikes, all 6 Gulf states moved toward Iran. Israel lost its European cover and its Gulf coalition in the same 24 hours. And here is the game theory underneath that. The Gulf states are not moving toward Iran because they trust Iran. They are moving toward Iran because they are trapped. Iran is their neighbor. Iran demonstrated during this war that it can strike their desalination plants, their oil fields, their airports, using drones that cost $50,000 apiece, while their American-supplied missile defense systems cost $3 million per interception attempt. America's security umbrella is visibly leaking. A negotiating Iran, an Iran willing to do deals, is more manageable than an isolated Iran with nothing to lose. And that calculation, that shift from containment to coexistence, is the death of the strategic architecture Israel built over 40 years. 40 years of working to isolate Iran. 40 years of pulling the Gulf states away from Tehran. And in one ceasefire agreement, signed without Israel present, all of that strategic work was undone. So what does this mean going forward? What is actually at stake? I want to be direct about this, because I think a lot of analysis on this topic stays at the surface level. It talks about diplomatic tension without naming the underlying question. The underlying question is this: can Pax Judaica, can Israel's strategic project of regional dominance survive without the full and unambiguous backing of the United States? And I think the honest answer, based on everything we have just walked through, is no. Not because Israel lacks military capacity. Israel's military capability is extraordinary. Not because Iran has destroyed the regional balance. Iran took significant damage in this war. But because Pax Judaica was never primarily a military project. It was a political project. Its foundation was not Israeli firepower. Its foundation was the credibility of American commitment. The guarantee that when Israel acted in Lebanon, in Gaza, against Iranian nuclear facilities, America would provide the diplomatic cover, the weapons resupply, the UN veto, the economic protection. That guarantee just developed a visible crack. America negotiated with Iran behind Israel's back. America signed away Iranian legitimacy over Hormuz without consulting its most important Middle Eastern ally. America's vice president told that ally to wake up. And now Netanyahu is making a calculation that I think is the most important and most underreported development in this entire story. Netanyahu is operating as if the American security guarantee is no longer reliable. That is what the public defiance means. That is what, even if America asks us to withdraw, we will not means. Israel is not defying America because Netanyahu is reckless or politically desperate, though both of those things may also be true. Israel is defying America because Israel has concluded that American protection is no longer unconditional. And when protection becomes conditional, you stop calibrating your behavior to the protector's preferences and start calibrating it to your own survival calculus. That is the patron-client inversion completing itself. The client is no longer behaving like a client. Here is what I want you to watch specifically in the next 2 to 3 days. First, watch what Israel does in southern Lebanon. Not what it says, what it does. If Israeli military operations in Lebanon continue or escalate after the MOU's 60-day clock starts running, that will tell you that Israel has made a definitive decision to operate outside the American diplomatic framework. That the Pax Judaica strategy is now being pursued without American cover, on Israeli terms, on an Israeli timeline. Second, watch the Abraham Accords. Senator Lindsey Graham has publicly proposed conditioning Saudi Arabia's potential participation in the Abraham Accords on Saudi Arabia supporting American policy toward Iran. Think carefully about what that proposal reveals. America is now using Israeli Gulf normalization, the diplomatic achievement that was supposed to cement Pax Judaica, as leverage against the Gulf states in an entirely separate dispute. That is not how you treat a strategic architecture you believe in. That is how you treat a bargaining chip. Third, and this is the one I think matters most in the long run, watch for any private back channel between Israel and Russia or Israel and China. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but when a junior partner loses confidence in its patron, it starts exploring whether alternative arrangements are possible. It does not abandon the existing relationship immediately, but it begins quietly testing what the world looks like without it. Let me bring this all together. The United States went to war with Iran as Israel's partner. America supplied the air power, the intelligence, the naval assets. Israel supplied the operational depth, the targeting data, the regional legitimacy for the campaign. The plan, never publicly stated but structurally obvious, was to degrade Iran to the point of collapse or total capitulation. And in that collapsed Iran, Israel would stand as the undisputed regional hegemon. Pax Judaica realized. Iran did not collapse. America needed an exit. America found one in Islamabad. And the price of that exit, the concession that made the deal possible, was Iranian legitimacy. The recognition that Iran is a permanent regional power that must be managed, not a temporary aberration that can be destroyed. Israel was not consulted. Israel was not present. Israel was told after the fact to wake up and smell reality. 92% of Israelis believe Iran won. The Gulf coalition Israel spent 40 years building has moved toward Tehran. And the Vice President of the United States is using the language of a patron terminating a relationship. The Islamabad MOU is not just a ceasefire agreement. It is the document that officially ended the era of unconditional American commitment to Israeli regional hegemony. Whether Israel can adapt to that new reality, whether it can build a viable strategic position without the full underwriting of American power, is the question that will define the next decade of Middle Eastern politics. I don't have the answer to that, but I'll tell you one thing. When the architect of a 40-year strategic project watches its foundational premise get signed away in a palace in Pakistan by the ally that was supposed to make it possible, and responds not by reconsidering the project, but by declaring independence from the ally. That is not a country that has processed what just happened. That is a country still inside the blindness. And history is not kind to the blindness. Think about that, and I'll see you in the next one.